Hello, everybody. My name is Jerry Simons. I'm here with Eliot Katz, and we want to talk a little bit about some of our adventures. I'm a PA, physician assistant, where I've worked with patients with persistent tick-borne diseases, and I've written for the Lyme Times, and I've worked with the Tick-Borne Disease Alliance, Stony Brook Southampton Tick Clinic, and I've been involved in tick research and both innovative and standard treatments for all things tick-borne disease related. And we're going to hear from Eliot now.
Hi. My name is Eliot Katz. I'm in Hoboken, New Jersey. Uh, I've lived in both New Jersey and New York City. I'm a longtime poet and political activist. I helped create housing and food programs for homeless individuals and families in central New Jersey, programs that are still going on. And I've been a longtime peace activist. I'm the author of about 7 poetry books and also a book, a prose book, scholarly prose book on the poetry and politics of the late poet Allen Ginsberg, who is well known internationally, especially for writing a very well known poem called Howl, and who was a one-time teacher of mine in Boulder, Colorado in 1980, and a longtime friend until his death in 1997. So,
Fantastic.
I'm somebody who's been dealing with Lyme disease for about 15 years, finally, thankfully, very much improved, in large part with the help of Jerry Simons. And I really appreciate Jerry's help in my what Jerry called adventures. Initially, they were struggles, and then
Hmm.
they became more like adventures. But they started off as struggles, and um, it took me about 2 years of aches and pains to get a diagnosis of Lyme disease, and then another year or so to be able to find the Morrison Center where Jerry works, and to find Jerry and one Chinese herb doctor also in New York who helped me start on the road to treatment for Lyme disease. So I've really appreciated Jerry's help, and now I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with Jerry, which we hope will help other people who are beginning or in the middle of a journey to, find out more about Lyme disease, whether for themselves or maybe for a loved one. But what we decided to do is I'm going to start off by reading a little poetry. And I have a book right now. I have a book of new and selected poems that's getting translated into Italian for a publication in Florence, Italy in early 2025. And one of the new poems in that book is a long poem called Life is a Constant Struggle Between Fragility and Resilience. And I'm going to read, it's a long poem, about 20 pages. I'm just going to read a few short sections from it. The first section is number 4, called Pain. Pain is a remarkable pilot of insanity. It takes off from the base of the brain and spreads via unpredictable slings and arrows. Where it will go next can sometimes be seen only in dreams. In my dreams, I was tired of moving ice packs and heating pads from one joint to the next. So I put one ice pack directly into my brain. It helped a little bit, but it was tough to extract. There were a lot of difficult transitions to make in becoming a disabled person after having been a hard-working public activist and democratic leftist butterfly for much of the past 4 decades. I had to learn new ways of walking and talking. I had to develop a new laugh that would sound like I still believed in humor, which I sometimes did. Often the laughing sounded to my loved ones like I was a ghost crying. Some nights I would concentrate as deeply as I could and vow to myself to learn the mind over pain trick. Come on, pain, give me your best shot. I would plead when I thought I was ready. Okay, I would say just a few minutes later, you win. In another dimension of space and time, I had an instinctual feeling there was a healthier me trying to cross the temporal barrier to lend me a hand. The pain gradually became me, even as I kept trying my best to make sure that I wasn't only my pain. And then I also have a section describing my struggle to find a doctor who could diagnose me and then treat me. And I mention you in one of my sections, along with some of the herbs like cryptolepis and Japanese knotweed that have helped me in my journey. And then I think we'll talk more about later. But I don't want to read for too long, so I'm just going to skip to one of the later sections in the poem. And
Fantastic.
my reading of this with a section 24 called Hope. No matter how difficult things get, I have to hold on to hope as the only way I know how to live. Hope that human solidarity might arrive in the nick of time to save the daily planet, like in the old Superman television episodes. And yet, I also know hope is a drug with some of the most potentially dangerous side effects on the planet. A drug used by both establishment and alternative voices, hoping against hope to change what seems to be the inevitable disappointments of the species. What I've learned after my years of health struggles is to hope for a new kind of hope. I cannot give up on the utopian potential of future generations inventing new ways to win justice filled struggles.
Fantastic, Eliot. I can see why you are in demand for poetry readings, not only all over Zoom, but especially in northern New Jersey for sure.
Thank you,
So I
Gerald.
have an important question for you. How would you say that being afflicted with tick-borne disease affected your work? Was it a hindrance? Did it open up new ideas? Tell us a little bit about how your illness affected your work as a poet.
Well, uh, those are really two different questions. How it affected my work and how it affected my work as a poet,
Hmm.
because it's, there's less than a handful of poets who can make a living as
Hmm.
poets.
True.
You
Hmm.
know, there are many poets who can teach poetry and make a living, but from the actual writing and publishing and selling books, that's incredibly few. My old teacher, Allen Ginsberg, was one of those few because
Hmm.
he got paid, quite a good fee for doing readings. Most of us, don't have that. And he also sold 1 million copies of his poetry books, which is very rare. But so in terms of my work life, it definitely affected my work life because I was working a job and and I had to stop working one job. And then as I started to get a little healthier, I got another job, which was as a writer for a human rights law group that I'm not going to name today. But uh, then at a certain point, I got various symptoms from my struggle with Lyme disease. Um, it started off with terrible joint pains, as I described in my poem. Every joint in my body, shoulders, elbows, wrists, knees, ankles, low back, mid back, and just putting heating pad and ice packs all over. Um, but then once I started treatment, started getting better. My initial treatment was with antibiotics, and then one and from taking the antibiotics, the next thing I got was diverticulitis.
Hmm.
And when I got that, you know, I could not go into the office for this job I had, and it was actually a half-time job only, but I still, you know, I was commuting. I was living in Astoria, Queens at the time, commuting into downtown Manhattan, and I just couldn't do it. So they let me work from home for a little while, and then they told me they needed me into the office, and I couldn't do it. So I lost my job, and eventually got on Social Security disability. So, and I enjoyed that job. So,
Hmm.
so the Lyme disease took, affected my life quite a lot, both in terms of the pain and in terms of work. As a
Right.
poet, I could still sit at my computer and type. I
Mm-hmm.
could not go out to do as many poetry readings or to attend as many poetry readings. And I was a very hardworking activist until I got Lyme disease. And I still do some activism. I'm right now working, for instance, in organizing a music and poetry benefit in June for a group called New Jersey Peace Action.
Mm-hmm.
But but it very much affected my life. Not quite as much affecting my poem. So at the time I was sickest, both with my diverticulitis, and then one other thing that I'm pretty sure was triggered by the Lyme disease, although I can't be certain of it, was at one point about 7 or 8 years ago, my neck got knocked out. I'd had low back problems since I was about 15, but never neck problems.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I had to get a major neck surgery with with 4 levels of titanium rods to prevent myself from being paralyzed. So I spent a week in the hospital and several weeks in 2 different rehab centers. And so, certainly at those times, I wasn't, focused on working as a poet or any other kind of work,
Of
except trying
course.
to live and to see if I could get some health back. But it has really, but Lyme disease, has affected me both in terms of affecting my direction of my life and causing me pain for many years that is just now finally reducing to tolerable levels. Still there, but tolerable.
So, Elliot, do you have a memory of a visit to a park or a backyard, like somewhere where you might have been, originally exposed to Lyme?
Well, you know, uh, I think you know my story about this, but I'm not even sure. But uh, my partner, um, Sierra Vivian, is had worked for 20 something years as a fire lookout in the um, in the boreal forest of the Canadian Rockies.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been together since 2000 and married since 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when we first met, she was working summers there, and I used to go visit for a week or two each summer. And at that time, they didn't think they had Lyme disease that far north yet. This was an area for Americans who don't know the Canadian geography. This is an area above Montana, part of the
Mm-hmm.
Rocky Mountains. She was on a 5,000-foot mountain 50 miles from the next human being, surrounded, evergreen trees as far as the eye could see, except for some clear cuts
Mm-hmm.
from loggers. But, you know, um, I may have gotten at one time, there was a very heavy incident where firefighting, she was there as a fire lookout, calling in on radios when she sees smoke. And then the uh, they would send firefighting helicopters to drop water or chemicals to put out fires. And one summer during the week or two that I was there, a helicopter crashed on the
Mm-hmm.
side of her mountaintop. So that was the summer that I was thickest into the brush, into the forest. And I have always thought, although I've always thought that I probably got a tick there when they didn't think they had ticks. And
Mm-hmm.
I certainly did not see a tick bite or get a bullseye rash. And I think that's one of the first things people should know. And you can, confirm or say it a little differently than me. But I think one of the first things people should know is that some people think that when you get Lyme disease, you always get a bullseye rash to tell you that you get Lyme disease. But I think now most experts are saying that fewer than half the people who get a tick and get Lyme disease ever see a tick or the bullseye rash. And so when you don't catch it, if you catch it early, it's much more treatable than if you don't catch it early, which is my case.
Right. It's always better to treat early. And on Long Island, where I am, I have a very low threshold for giving doxycycline for people in the summer that have the flu-like symptoms with the aches. And we know that depending on the journal you read, about 70% of people may have this erythema migrans rash. But if it's in your hair, behind your knee, in your butt crack, you may never even be able to see that rash. And it doesn't even have to always look like a bullseye. It could just be a red circular splotch with no central clearing. So there was a day where they said to have Lyme, you must have an erythema migrans rash. Now we know that number is down to about 70 percent, and it may not always look like a classic rash, for example.
Let me ask you, in your experience, Jerry, when you see patients, do most patients come to see you when they're looking to figure out what's causing their symptoms? Or do most patients come to see you after they've already been diagnosed with Lyme disease and they're looking to find somebody who's an expert in developing the proper treatments? And I should mention that in my experience, and I think you confirm this, that different people respond differently to the different possible treatments because there is not a universal treatment currently for Lyme disease. That kind of thing is still being researched. So, so I guess so. I have a two-part question. Do you end up having to help people get their diagnosis a lot, and how do you begin to and continue to develop the proper treatments for each individual?
Right. Great. So, a couple of questions there. So, in my old days, when I did a lot of urgent care and walk-in medicine, people would come to me with strange migrating joint pains and flu and fatigue. And again, being in the Northeast where there's a big, epidemic of tick-borne disease, I would have a very low threshold for treating them early because we know that early treatment is critical, not waiting. I'd rather give people $30 worth of doxycycline and then they have to stop it a few days later and protecting the gut with probiotics and avoiding the sun. I'm still a firm believer that everybody should try doxycycline at least once because it does work when used correctly, which could be another video. For my situation now, most people who are trying to figure out chronic multi-organ system complaints, nervous system, joints, fatigue, cartilage, circulatory issues, um, are trying to, figure out have they is Lyme disease or a tick-borne disease playing a role in their illness? That is a big part of my practice. And also, number two is people who seem like they've done and tried everything Lyme wise, and they're just not making any progress, and they have a confirmed case of Lyme. Those are the other big clientele and
Right,
patients that I'm seeing.
right. And how do you use your instincts to decide whether let's say somebody tries doxycycline. In my case, let me tell you, go back to my experience. In my case, doxycycline was the first thing that somebody gave me, and they gave me two. And this was somebody who had gone to one meeting about Lyme disease, but didn't consider herself an expert in treating Lyme disease.
Hmm.
But she initially started off by giving me 2 weeks worth of doxycycline, and it
Right.
helped me, which is you know, and let me go one step backwards to say first that I had been tested negative for Lyme disease by Quest, and then tested positive for Lyme disease by IGeneX, which is
Hmm.
the Lyme specialist blood lab.
Hmm.
So I was confused. I had also been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called writer's syndrome, which was ironic for me being a writer,
A
but
writer,
it
of
wasn't it
course.
wasn't it
Right.
wasn't spelled WR. It was named after the doctor who developed this idea, REI writers. But I had gone to a rheumatologist who had given me mostly like prescription strength Advil, and then who had tried to give me something that a steroid that suppressed my immune system and made me feel a lot worse. From what I imagined, letting the Lyme bacteria dig in deeper, and my chills got worse, my joint pains got worse, and so I was very confused about how to deal with things. So I had one lab telling me I had Lyme disease, another lab telling me I didn't have Lyme disease, the rheumatologist telling me, well, if you go to a Lyme specialist lab, they're going to tell you have Lyme disease. Although
Hmm.
later I did also get, as I was treated for years, I got a negative test from IGeneX, so I knew I was getting better. But
Got
uh,
it.
but my question is, how do you deal with this? The confusion of people who don't know,
Right.
you know, who
So
who get the
everybody, if you're
who get
if
the
you're watching,
contradictory tests.
right. So everybody, if you're watching this and taking notes, this is probably the part that you want to write down. Uh, I actually do use the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. If you look at their criteria for diagnosing Lyme disease, they really talk a lot about looking at the signs and symptoms of Lyme, which we'll go over in a moment. Number two, the likelihood that a patient has been exposed to a deer tick, a black-legged tick, and also the possibility that other illnesses have been ruled out. For example, like thyroid, or long haul COVID, or things along those lines. So when I'm diagnosing Lyme, I look at the CDC symptoms. I look at the chance that they've been exposed to a black-legged or a deer tick, that other diseases have been ruled out. And then after that, looking at, laboratory blood work, for example, thyroid, hormones, other inflammatory conditions.
And there are,
Oh,
and besides Lyme negative or Lyme positive, there are certain other tests like immune markers too, like CD57, that can also give you hints, right?
right. So the world of Lyme disease uh, blood work is changing. Not only do we do the standard two-tiered testing like the ELISA and the Western blot, but especially in people who are having symptoms, doing a PCR, we may be able to actually find the germ in the blood. Or, for
Mm.
example, if someone has a swollen knee, we can remove fluid from the knee and look for the germ there. Even in the cerebral spinal fluid, we can look for that also. There are natural killer cell markers like CD57, which is controversial, but I found using it as a trend can definitely be useful. We like nice high CD57s. A low CD57, one thing that it might indicate is that there is Lyme in the system. Also, different markers for things like complement 3 and complement 4, are other markers we can use. And as I said before, there are other types of testings for Lyme, including what's called the VC10 and immunoblot. So there are newer and innovative testings for Lyme that is starting to come through. Um, Cornell actually, back in 2011, looked at epitope mapping of antibodies to what's called the VLSE protein, which is a protein in the Lyme germ, Borrelia burgdorferi, and found that this particular antibody was high in patients who had symptoms after their initial Lyme treatment. Eliot, you heard that right. There's an antibody to a protein. The protein is called VLSE, which has been found to be elevated in people who have been treated for Lyme and still having symptoms. So there is a little glimmer of hope for
I've
new blood work markings.
I've got to get that test myself. I don't think I've had that one yet.
Hmm.
But and then let me ask you, let me go back again. I went backwards instead of forwards there for a second. But let me ask you that. So I took doxycycline for 2 weeks and it helped a lot, but it didn't cure me. And when they gave me more antibiotics, and I think I had a different one there for the next 2 weeks. That's when it hurt I was taking probiotics, but I still got diverticulitis. It still hurt my gut. So, and what ended up helping me were I got a Chinese herbal protocol from Dr. Zhang, the Zhang Clinic in New York City, and then I got your help in using different vitamin IVs and also herbs.
Mhm.
There's been some new research on herbs, like from Johns Hopkins. We've talked about showing the usefulness of one herb. It's particularly useful for both Lyme and Bartonella, called Cryptolepis, which I'm taking now. And and partly these herbs have especially helped me because I haven't been able to get into the Morrison Center as much since COVID. So I'm
Mhm.
taking things like Cryptolepis and Japanese knotweed. But in your work, how do you use your instincts to tell when a person, you know, has been helped but not cured by doxycycline? And then how do you use your instincts to figure out what to try next with each person?
Yeah, great question. So, Elliot, we know that there are many variations of the Lyme germ. Some people may just have Lyme arthritis. Some people may have Lyme that settles in the nervous system. They may have a combination of different things. So, for almost everyone who has Lyme disease that persists after the initial treatment, they have what we call multi-organ system complaints. So they may have joint or muscle and a headache, or fatigue and muscle aches, or traveling joint pain. So they have more than one organ system that's involved. So when someone sees me after 6 months or 6 years of symptoms, they come to the office, I'll ask if they've ever tried doxycycline. And many people have not had a 3 or 4 week treatment of doxycycline. So I have a very low threshold for having people at least
Right,
start doxycycline.
right.
Now, Elliot, what you mentioned before was an important study um, by Zhang at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
And this is a different Zhang than I mentioned.
Correct, different Zhang, right? October of 2017, they published an article looking at essential oils: oregano, cinnamon, clove, citronella, and wintergreen, that worked against um, the Borrelia burgdorferi, as well as what we call persisters, things like cyst and biofilm, germs that have been around the body and have started to defend itself against the immune system. Persister forms, things like cyst, biofilm, and L form. Now, the question of when do I pick herbal or prescription, and or when do we actually use a combination? Sometimes the decision is already made for me, because patients will come to me and they'll say, I only want prescription medicine. And I have some people that come to me, I only want herbal medicine. I don't want any pharmaceuticals. But for most people, I found that a blend of both of these definitely tends to work.
I think once you've dealt with too many years of pain, you tend to want whatever's going to help be
Of
helpful.
course, right.
You
And
know,
remember,
you
a
you,
lot of
you don't want to
people,
say, I don't want to, that's going to help me, but I don't want that.
right.
You know,
And
people are
remember that a lot of people like doxycycline because it is potently anti-inflammatory.
right.
It does have this anti-inflammatory aspect. But in my own experience, and not published data, but my own experience, is herbs like teasel root and cat's claw are the basic herbs that everyone should start with. My experience, they do have a doxycycline like antimicrobial effect. The bonus of cat's claw is there's some data that shows that it helps to upregulate the immune response. So it kills germs and helps the immune system. Now, a lot of, major pharmacies, mail order pharmacies, you can get doxycycline for under $10.
Right.
Some antimicrobial regimens are much more expensive, whereas you can get many herbs, good quality herbs, relatively cheap. So there is a price point issue that I'm always thinking about, with not only what direction is the patient looking for, but what are we looking at, as a monthly budget? What will fit into their budget to get over this. I've had people that have gotten over this on $15 a month and people that have spent $150 or more just on either herbs or prescription drugs.
And of course, some people are even trying, very expensive experimental things, like stem cell
Right.
treatments that, you know,
That's going to be our next conversation about some of these
I
more.
showed you this video by this uh, UK singer-songwriter called Ren, who
Yeah,
has this big hit song called Hi Ren, and who's been dealing with Lyme disease. And, because there was a doctor, I think in California, who loved his work so much, the doctor invited him to get a free stem cell treatment, which he said helped him quite a bit.
amazing, remarkable. I mean, stem cell, like AI is the future in computers. In healthcare, stem cells show
Right,
a lot of big promise like that.
right.
Hmm. Great. Fantastic.
So, um, let me say a few more things and ask you a few more things. One thing I wanted to say, one thing that helped me when I was diagnosed with Lyme disease is that um, the first doctor who knew a little bit about Lyme disease and who diagnosed me also recommended a few books and videos to give me information. There was a book by Pamela Weintraub called Cure Unknown Inside the Lyme Epidemic, and a film called Under Our Skin that I think are foundational sources of information for people just starting to research Lyme disease, which I ended up, finding out a lot more than I ever wanted to know about any single illness. But I wondered, there are also, I first found out about Dr. Morrison and then about you from a book, and I forget what it was called. I think it was edited by Pamela Weintraub, but it was like 12 holistic physicians recommending treatments for Lyme disease.
Correct. I remember that.
But
Right.
I wondered two things. Do you have one or two books by expert and especially expert integrative doctors who know both Western medicine and herbs that you might recommend for somebody looking for information about treating Lyme disease? And also, there's a medical group of doctors who focus on Lyme and other and tick-borne infections, including co-infections, called ILADS, ILADS. And I wonder, do you think that's a good source, or are there other sources for people in different parts of the country to find a doctor with expertise in Lyme disease? Because one of the things I found out in my own experience, and I think you could probably definitely confirm this, is that most doctors do not have expertise in Lyme disease, except very basic and really only the basic information of how to treat Lyme disease with antibiotics if it's caught right away. And if it isn't, then it's a different ball game that most doctors are not trained in. So, number one, books to recommend, and number two, how people in different parts of the country find a doctor.
Great. Yeah, good questions. And, to that point, medicine has become so specialized, that it's impossible for a generalist to go really deep into, any one particular area, usually. So, yeah, looking for a specialist in the disease, whether it's diabetes or COPD or tick-borne infection, very often is the way to go. Now, the problem with science and medicine is sometimes as soon as that book is published, it's already started to be out of date.
Right.
So, what I generally tell people to do is for easy reading, the organization Project Lyme has a really remarkable array of reading material, research. They summarize all of the latest and greatest articles, whether you look at their Instagram and watch their videos or go to the Project Lyme website. And also kind of the mothership of all Lyme organizations, the Global Lyme Alliance, which is the successor to the Tick-Borne Disease Alliance that I used to work with, also has a great amount of material. And they even have a program where patients who are kind of feeling lost and alone and directionless can go to the Global Lyme Alliance website, and they have a program where you can get like a an advisor from GLA to call you and kind of help give you some direction.
And will that person also be able to help you find a doctor with expertise in your area?
I believe that they help with that or they give you the resources for that.
Right,
Between Project Lyme, Global Lyme, iLads, and your local Lyme support group, you'll be able to find out the network of, people that you need to see.
right. Yeah, I know New York City has a very good Lyme support group of patients. I don't know how many of those there are around the country, but I
Yeah,
hope
more and more
they're
they're popping up.
good.
Right. Hmm.
Right.
So tell us what you're doing right now and what you think your future holds, treatment wise.
Well, you know, I'm 67 now, and I feel like I'm feeling better at 67 than I did at 57.
Congratulations.
So
I could tell just looking at you also.
I'm, I'm
So
very thankful for that. And I'm trying to get back to, writing more poems and also, doing more publishing
mhm,
and organizing more events.
great.
Um,
And remind
I,
us if people were going to buy just one Eliot Katz book, which would be the one they should buy?
well, my poetry books, I think my two best poetry books are one called Unlocking the Exits that was published by Coffee House Press. And one of the poems there's an elegy for Allen Ginsberg in there, just since I was
Hmm.
talking about Allen. But one of the major poems in there is like a 60-page poem called Liberation Recalled, which part of that poem um, deals with the experience of my late mother, who was a Holocaust survivor who uh, spent who spent 6 months in Auschwitz and then 3 months in two other World War II Nazi concentration camps. And she lost most of her family, five siblings, and her two parents in Auschwitz in the gas
That's
chamber.
tragic. I hate hearing
And
that
two,
story.
and
Hmm.
two, uh, and two others here, her and two other sisters survived and were liberated in 1945 at the end of the war. Um, and taken to Sweden initially and then to the US. But so that's Unlocking the Exits. And then my other book is called Love, War, Fire, Wind, Looking Out from North America's Skull, and which half the poems are like uh, poems. Half the poems are poems written from the Canadian boreal forest,
Hmm.
which was a mountain called Nose Mountain. So as you go up a helicopter, it looks like you're going up to a skull. So
Ah,
that's why I called it
amazing.
Looking Out from North America's Skull.
Hmm.
And then half the poems are post 9/11 poems,
Right.
talking about 9/11. A poem I have about 9/11 in there, which called When the Skyline Crumbles, was one poem of mine that gets written about in a bunch of scholarly books about poems after wars or trauma. And section of that got that poem got picked up in an Associated Press story, and along with Bob Dylan songs and Picasso paintings. And so that was the poem of mine that had most circulation probably. And
Remarkable.
and then anti-war, and then poems against. I've been a long time peace activist. So there are poems in that book against the wars that followed
Hmm.
9/11 in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then, you know, I have this new book coming out. I can't even remember if I mentioned this in the beginning of this talk, but I have a new book of new and selected poems being translated into Italian, and my long Holocaust poem, Liberation Recalled, is going to be the title poem of that book. And we're not yet sure if that book will be Italian only or bilingual. And I am trying to find a US publisher for a similar selection of poems now. So,
Remarkable. Very exciting. So, everyone, if you're taking notes as we start wrapping it up, we know that Lyme disease is transmitted by a tick bite, the black-legged or deer tick. You may or may not get the erythema migrans rash. You may not even see it. If you treat it early, patients tend to actually do very well. But it's when the symptoms persist and get into more than one organ, which is where we're looking at possibly repeated course of doxycycline, some of the essential oils mentioned in the study previously, some of the herbs that Eliot mentioned as well. So there is a lot of hope out there. There's more and more resources that are out there. And there's a team of people that want to help you if you're not feeling your best.
And I
Eliot,
just,
any final words?
well, I just want to add one thing to what you're just saying, which is that when people are looking at Lyme disease, both for diagnosis and treatment, they also want to look at co-infections that are often carried by the same tick. Some of those common ones are Bartonella and Babesia,
Right?
and for some of them, like Babesia, that requires a different treatment.
Correct. Exactly. Requires a
So,
different treatment. And one of the things we mentioned before were these persisters like cyst and biofilm and round body and L forms, which
right,
may require their own.
The Lyme bacteria can change form to try to protect itself as you're trying to get rid of it.
Exactly. Excellent.
Very smart bacteria,
A
right?
very smart bacteria. It's smarter than syphilis, which is one of the most complicated bacteria that's out there. So fantastic. All right, everybody, stay tuned for
Well,
Elliot and Jerry part
well,
two.
this was terrific, Jerry.
Was really terrific. We will continue
Thank
it
you for
next time.
this, and also thank you so much for being such a great help to me in my health adventures for
Fantastic.
maybe a dozen to 15 years now. I think it's been,
That's
you
true. And
know,
look at you now.
I would not be feeling better at 67 than I did at 57 if not for your amazing help.
Love it. Fantastic. All right, everyone. We will see you for part two next time.
Thank you, Jerry.
You bet. Great.